Have you ever considered that the villains we grew up fearing might not be evil at all? What if, for centuries, the stories we've been told were just one side of a much bigger picture? Think about it. The classic villains in folklore. The big bad wolf, the wicked witch in the forest, the monstrous outcasts. Their tales are always filled with terror and malice. But who wrote these stories, and whose side were they on? Imagine this: a wandering storyteller, tired of the same old tales of shining heroes, decides to do something different. He doesn't seek out knights in shining armor. Instead, he goes looking for the so-called villains to hear their side of the story. His journey takes him deep into a dark forest, the very same one where the grey wolf was hunted down in countless fables. There, he doesn't find a mindless beast hungry for blood. He finds a creature desperately defending its last patch of territory from encroaching humans. The terrifying growls that echoed through the trees weren't threats of violence. They were warnings. A desperate plea to be left alone. But no one ever stopped to listen. Continuing his journey, the storyteller stumbles upon a secluded cottage, the supposed lair of a wicked witch. He cautiously approaches, expecting to find cauldrons of sinister potions and caged children. Instead, he finds a quiet, wise woman surrounded by herbs, ancient books, and the gentle aroma of healing teas. She wasn't a kidnapper or a curse weaver. She was a keeper of forgotten knowledge, a healer who tended to the sick and injured who were brave enough to seek her out. Her only crime, living differently. She didn't conform to the village norms, and for that, she was branded a monster. People feared what they didn't understand, and that fear twisted her into a symbol of evil. The more of these villains the storyteller met, the more he realized something profound. The clear, solid line between good and evil that we see in stories is, in reality, incredibly thin and blurry. Actions we label as cruel are often just desperate acts of survival. Decisions that are condemned by society can sometimes spring from a place of kindness, a kindness that has been warped and misunderstood by prejudice and mass hysteria. He saw how a figure ostracized for their unusual appearance was not a monster, but someone who had been so relentlessly bullied and feared that their only defense was to push the world away. Their isolation wasn't a choice. It was a cage built by others' ignorance. He learned that the greedy dragon hoarding treasure wasn't motivated by avarice. The gold and jewels were the last remnants of a forgotten civilization it was sworn to protect. Its fiery breath a desperate attempt to guard history against those who would melt it down for coin. The storyteller began to see a pattern. History isn't just written by the victors, it's also drastically simplified. Complex individuals are flattened into one-dimensional characters because it makes for an easier, more memorable tale. It's far simpler to tell a story about a good hero versus a bad villain than to explain the complicated mess of misunderstanding, fear, and circumstance that truly drives conflict. And in this simplification, we find a reflection of ourselves. The most famous villains in our stories are often manifestations of our own deepest fears. We fear the unknown, so we demonize the witch who lives by different rules. We fear the wild and untamable parts of nature, so we cast the wolf as a bloodthirsty killer. We fear the parts of ourselves that don't fit in, so we create monsters out of the marginalized. Most of all, we fear admitting that sometimes we are the ones causing the harm. But we are the ones encroaching on the wolf's territory, fearing the witch's wisdom, and ostracizing the different. When the storyteller finally returned from his travels, he wasn't carrying tales of heroic triumphs. He came back with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. He no longer told stories that offered simple answers. Instead, he invited his listeners to become explorers themselves. He urged them to revisit the old fables, but this time with fresh eyes and an open mind. To ask questions before passing judgment. To try and hear the voices that have been silenced and buried under centuries of biased narration. What if the wicked stepmother was a woman trapped in a difficult situation, trying her best in a society that gave her no power? What if the fearsome giant was just lonely, his booming voice mistaken for anger when it was just a call for a friend? This isn't about excusing genuinely harmful actions. It's about understanding the context, the motivation, and the humanity that exists on all sides of a story. Perhaps the true heroes aren't always the ones standing in the spotlight, celebrated and adored. But maybe the real heroes are the ones who dare to listen, to understand, and to offer empathy where others offer condemnation, and the villains we've been taught to hate. Maybe they are just the ones who were never given a chance to tell their own story. So, the next time you hear a tale of good versus evil, take a moment to pause. Ask yourself, who is telling this story and whose voice is missing? The world is rarely as simple as black and white. It's in the shades of grey that we find the most profound truths. It's in listening to the wolf's howl, not as a threat, but as a lament, that we truly begin to understand. Thank you for watching. If this idea resonated with you, consider subscribing and joining our community of curious minds. Let's keep questioning the stories we're told together.